March the 9th. I'll call this meeting to order, and pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number 78, and in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the open public meetings of the Allgood City Council are being held via electronic means with limited public access. We do have several in the audience with us tonight, and we are on Facebook. If you would like to join and view the meeting with us or ask questions, there will be a period of time when we will address those. But as we begin our meetings, we like to do so with the invocation and pledge. And we're happy to welcome back Mr. and Mrs. Bill Matheny. We haven't seen them in a while. And I'd like to, if he doesn't mind, call on Mr. Matheny to lead us in prayer, and then ask Councilman Hill if he wouldn't mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you all would please stand for those.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Be seated. Ms. Flatt, would you please call the roll?
Honorable Mayor Fowler,
Here.
Honorable Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Present.
Honorable Councilman Graves,
Here.
Honorable Councilwoman Hawkins,
Here.
Honorable Councilman Hill.
Present.
I would ask the council to now look at the agenda and the accompanying minutes and let me know if, number one, you approve of the agenda as it has been presented.
I make the motion to approve as presented.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Flatt?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins,
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Now, if you'll turn your attention to the minutes of our last meeting, if there are any additions, subtractions, any corrections that need to be made, please look at those and let me know at this time.
Make a motion to adopt.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Hill, a second by Ms. Hawkins. Ms. Flatt?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins,
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
If you will recall from our last meeting, we have several ordinances that we were considering to update our building codes. And it is my understanding that Mr. Lane has been looking at those, and these are actually just bringing us up to date with those building codes. And I don't know if Mr. Rader was asked to look at those as well.
I did look at those with Mr. Lane, and I spoke to Mr. Lane since the last meeting, and we looked at some of those changes. And one of the ones that we talked about at the last meeting was the sprinkler issue. And Mr. Lane assures me that he removed that section from the building codes, and that there is a list of exceptions that he and Ms. Flatt have prepared. And so that does address that concern. I did also look at the state statute that we did talk about briefly last time, that talks about the requirement to adopt building codes that are no older than 6 years old. And the state statute provides that the city really cannot adopt building codes that are less strict than what the state would otherwise have if you had no building codes. And so I think that what Mr. Lane and Ms. Flatt have done is update those codes, and appears to be consistent with that statute, and I think it does address some of those concerns.
All right, are those issues, were they addressed when they were presented at the last meeting?
Apparently, the written copy that I did not have at the last meeting did have those appended to the back. Is Mr. Lane here? Isn't that right?
He is.
Yeah, we actually reviewed the code, we went back and these are revisions or some stuff that was revised. It was out of the 15 code, which we skipped that cycle, and we're on the 18, so we're always usually a cycle behind because of the state statute of staying within, probably it was 7 years, is it 6 years?
I think it's 6.
It's 6?
Yeah.
I was thinking it was 7. But, and a lot of this, he's right, we can't get beneath this. There has been a lot of changes. I've actually read the residential and part of the commercial. I felt it more important we deal more with the residential. One thing we probably don't have, we probably need to appoint an appeals board. It does talk about the legislators in that city could be that. I don't know that we have formally ever done that. And by statute, we're supposed to do that. If somebody has a complaint, they have a right to come before that board. And the inspector acts as an officio. He states his case and they state theirs. And that board actually gets to make a determination, with the exception of what Mr. Rader said. We can't get beneath what the statute says if it's a code. I guess how it's interpreted would be the argument. I think it means this and you think it means that. And as Mr. Ron will tell you, this is a pretty complicated process. These codes, there's a lot of them. We have two on we have the residential, the commercial, and we have the plumbing, the mechanical, the energy code. And it's just, there's a lot of stuff goes with that even. So it's a great big ordeal. And usually a little common sense and everything works out. It has in the past. Sound like we might have a code expert on the panel. That's great. If we get in trouble, I'll call.
Well, I guess my question is more to the fact that we passed these on first reading. So they're coming up tonight for second reading. So if there's been any changes from the first and the second, then I want to make sure that we address that.
I've not been told of any changes from first to second. I think that we had some concerns during first reading as to whether or not some things were included. I did not have a written copy of those because they hadn't been sent to me prior, but I've talked to Mr. Lane since then, and he assures me those changes were all in the version
The
that you
original.
passed on first reading, so you should be okay with no changes.
Okay.
Of course, you are free to make some changes now if you want to. And what Mr. Lane was talking about, your code, your municipal code does have a provision for a codes enforcement board or appeals board. So that's already in your municipal code. It consists of 5 members. I don't know if you've appointed, we don't think that you've appointed anybody because we haven't had it come up in
We have
some
not.
time. So you can appoint some folks to serve on that if you want to, or wait until a situation arises to do that. But it's certainly good to have And the code, your municipal code requires you to have knowledgeable people, so somebody like Mr. Graves, who, if you could draft him into service, would be a good one to have on that board.
Well, anytime we can get 2 for 1, I'm always for that deal, so.
Yes, Mayor.
But I think that is something that we can address. But let's look then at your agendas on item number 3 under new business, which is consider approval to suspend the reading of ordinance, 652, 653, 654, 655, 656, 657, 658, 659, and 660. And the reason, again, that we were considering approval suspending all of those is that we're going to discuss them in greater detail as we go through the meeting. So I would entertain a motion to suspend the reading of those, and let's go ahead and proceed with the first one rather than reading all of these at one time.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Graves and Mr. Bilberry. So Ms. Flatt, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilberry.
Yes.
Honorable Graves.
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Now, if we'll look at item number 4, which is approval of second and final reading of 652-21. And again, that has to do with the International Residential Code.
Do I get to make a comment before we start voting on all these?
Absolutely.
At the last council meeting, I asked the question, has anyone compared the 2012 code to the 2018 code? And that brought on several different answers, but when I processed the answers, I came back with the answer really is no. And as Bob says, that's a huge undertaking. But I want to point out that we're adopting these, going through this process of adoption tonight. And what they used to tell me at the code meetings, that the codes are not worth the paper they're written on until somebody adopts them. And if you'll go to the 2015 codes on the internet and look at them, you can see state by state how the states have adopted them, and almost every one of them have a check mark by them where they've been amended. And if you go to the state of California, California takes the international code and changes it to the California code, and then the California code gets tweaked in Los Angeles to the Los Angeles code, and it just goes on and on. So what I'm trying to bring to the attention of the council and the people here is one code doesn't fit every application. There's a difference between New York City and Allgood. So there's lots of things that they may need there that we don't need here. And the reason I asked the question was, is there something that we need to change a little bit, or change the wording? And that's been done in some things, but that's the basis of my question. And knowing that we're going to have to do this down the road a few years from now, because they're working on the 21 codes, maybe it's time we start reviewing real quick on some of these as soon as they start hitting the streets. But I just wanted to make that comment before we vote. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. The one thing I suggested to Keith and Ann and them was to purchase the guidebook that shows the changes. You can always get documents that detail what changes were made. And then that's the easiest way to evaluate it, is to look at the published changes, how things differ. Because if you start reading the books for yourself, you got a full-time job for months. But I appreciate what you've done, and I just wanted to clarify that.
If we look at ordinance 652, that's adoption of the 2018 International Residential Code. The ordinance was passed on first reading, I believe, last month, and it is here for second reading. This ordinance has to do with regulating and governing the construction, alteration, movement, enlargement, replacement, repair, equipment, location, removal, and demolition of detached 1- and 2-family dwelling and multiple single-family dwellings, townhouses, not more than 3 stories in height, with separate means of egress in the city of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefore, which would repeal ordinance number 585-14 of the city of Allgood and all other ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. And I don't know if Mr. Lane wants to speak to that at all. It's pretty straightforward on its face. But if there are any questions or comments, we'd be happy to take those at this time. Hearing none, I would consider a motion for to approve the final reading for ordinance 652.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Mr. Bilbrey and Mr. Graves. Ms. Flatt, would you call the roll?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Bilbrey.
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
All right, item number 5, consider approval of second and final reading for ordinance 653, which again is a portion of adopting the 2018 International Building Code. And I'm looking at ordinance number 653, which I hope you all have a copy of. And it states that an ordinance of the City of Allgood adopting the 2018 edition of the International Building Code regulating and governing the conditions and maintenance of all property, buildings, and structures by providing the standards for supplied utilities and facilities and other physical things and conditions essential to ensure that structures are safe, sanitary, and fit for occupation and use, and the condemnation of buildings and structures unfit for human occupancy and use, and the demolition of such structures in the City of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefore, repealing ordinance number 586-14 of the City of Allgood, and all other ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. Are there any questions or comments about that ordinance?
Mayor, I might say on that one.
Yes, sir.
We also have some state statutes that kick in. The state of Tennessee says on the International Building Code, any structure 5,000 foot or greater shall be a engineered product. In other words, architects and engineers actually have to draft plans and put it together and stamp it, which doesn't exclude them from the code. They're supposed to be using the code in order to make that work. But it does give us the assurance that a professional is involved, that's been trained in that field to do that. And that's a state statute of 5,000 foot or greater, and we enforce that to the letter.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. That's good to know. All right. I will entertain a motion to approve second reading of ordinance 653.
Motion.
Mr. Bilbrey. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hill. Ms. Flatt?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey.
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
I know. Forgive us. Some of this is just kind of tedious. Ordinance number 654 is here for approval of second reading. This has to do with the International Plumbing Code. So this ordinance is an ordinance of the City of Allgood adopting the 2018 edition of the International Plumbing Code, regulating and governing the design, construction, quality of materials, erection, installation, alteration, repair, location, relocation, replacement, addition to, use or maintenance of plumbing systems in the City of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefore, repealing all ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. So this is dealing specifically more with the plumbing aspect of the building code. Does anyone have a question? I'd be happy to refer you to Mr. Lane. Okay. Hearing none, I would consider a motion to approve on second reading ordinance 654. Mr. Graves,
Second.
Mr. Bilbrey. Now Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Item number 7. Consider approval on second and final reading ordinance number 655, which is the 2018 edition of the International Mechanical Code. I do not have a copy of 655. I've got 656. You may got 655 of? Or I'm sorry, 6. Thank you. Ordinance number 655. The mayor and the city and the council of the City of Allgood hereby ordains that there be an ordinance of the City of Allgood adopting the 2018 edition of the International Mechanical Code, regulating and governing the design, construction, quality of materials, erection, installation, alteration, repair, location, relocation, replacement, addition to, use or maintenance of plumbing systems in the City of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collections of fees therefore, repealing all ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. That is number 655. Are there any questions or comments regarding 655? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve it on second reading.
Motion.
Mr. Bilbrey. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hill? Ms. Flatt?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins,
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Thank you for whoever lent me 655. All right. 656 is next. I know you're just on the edge of your seat. This is second and final reading of 656, which is to do with the International Fuel Gas Code. An ordinance of the City of Allgood adopting the 2018 edition of the International Fuel Gas Code, regulating and governing fuel gas systems and gas-fired appliances in the City of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collections of fees therefore, repealing all ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. Do we have any questions or comments about the International Fuel Gas Code? Hearing none, I will move that we adopt Ordinance 656 of the International Fuel Gas Code. Is there a second?
Second.
Fowler, Mr. Bilbrey, now Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Number 9, consider approval of second and final reading of Ordinance 657, adopting the 2018 edition of the International Existing Building Code. This is an ordinance of the City of Allgood adopting the 2018 edition of the International Existing Building Code, regulating and governing the repair, alteration, change of occupancy, addition and relocation of existing buildings, including historic buildings in the City of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefor, repealing all ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve on second reading Ordinance 657.
So moved.
Mr. Graves, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Bilbrey. Now Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Item number 10, Ordinance 658, which is the proposed adoption of the 2018 edition of the International Fire Code. An ordinance of the City of Allgood adopting the 2018 edition of the International Fire Code, regulating and governing the safeguarding of life and property from fire and explosion hazards arising from the storage, handling, and use of hazardous substances, materials, and devices, and from conditions hazardous to life or property in the occupancy of buildings and premises in the City of Allgood, providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefor, repealing all ordinances or parts of laws in conflict therewith. Any comments, questions from the audience about what this is concerning? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to go ahead and approve this on second reading.
Motion.
Mr. Bilbrey, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hill, now Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
I know it. That last one, that's not about the building code. I know everybody's been on pins and needles about that. Consider approval on second and final reading of Ordinance 659, which amends the fiscal year budget 2021 adopted by Ordinance 64620. And basically, this is just an offset. This is for a police grant that we received for $5,000 for special police services. And then there was the firearm auction, which netted approximately, well, it's $11,086.75. And so what we're trying to do here is to show money in, money out, so that is an offset, so that just shows a zero balance on that line. We approved this at the last meeting, but it has to be approved for second reading on an ordinance. Are there any questions about that? Okay. I will entertain a motion regarding Ordinance 659.
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Bilbrey. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hill. Now Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins.
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Item number 12. This is to consider approval on first reading of ordinance 660-21 to change the zoning classification of approximately 1.3 acres at 299 East Main Street from CA General Commercial to R3 High Density Residential. This has come to us through the Planning Commission. And just for those in the audience who may not be familiar with where this property is, we're talking about Main Street. I have to get oriented here, out toward the rock quarry. You want to address that, Mr. Lane? Would you, or? Okay. That way.
You was looking that way.
Yeah.
Chad's here, this is his project, he might can give us some insight on what is that.
Mr. Chad Gilbert, yeah. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your proposed project? Sure. Thank you.
Chad Gilbert, Hunter Properties, owner. We, about a year ago, we bought the old house next to our existing multifamily community out, I think everyone's familiar out this direction on Main Street. We, the house is old.
Across from the school, right
Yeah,
across from the school.
across from the school.
The,
next to
the old
quarry.
school. Let's make sure we know.
We're bordered by the rock quarry, the railroad, and more apartments, and across from the school. So it seemed like a reasonable, well, for one thing, it completes the, we had an eye towards this years ago when we designed it. We put the one building on the east side, we put one in the back, and then knowing that I think the lady that lived there may not always be there, we thought, well, one day it would make sense to complete the horseshoe around the pool, and we set it up for that, and that opportunity presented itself, so we bought it, and we're, you know, all things being considered, we're trying to offer a down zone, we're trying to take down an old house, and then architecturally blend in the completion of our community around the pool, so that's kind of what we're proposing.
Okay. Mr. Graves, do you have a question?
I've got a question. Are you considering the same kind of construction that you've used on the other projects in town where you build up a base of rock 12, 18 inches high and then start construction on that?
Well, we'd want to stabilize it. What we would do is have an eye towards, first of all, detention and drainage, making sure we stabilized whatever subgrade was there. If that took rock or some other means, we would not be opposed to using either one. So we can't run water in the building. We've got to get it up just enough to get it away from it and make sure we detain it and don't drain any more post-development than we do pre-development.
As I drive by there and look at the site, I noticed that the existing buildings, the newer ones, are at one elevation. Down at the house that you're going to tear down and build the new construction is at a different elevation. And then at a third elevation is Bradley Court, those little houses that are down in the flat. How do you propose to control the water from washing those away?
Well, it'd be like any other development. We're bound to your detention statutes, and we would follow every one of them to the letter of the law.
Well, what I'm getting at is I live across the road from the Cooper Dry Valley construction.
Yes, sir.
There was no water retention plan put in effect.
No, sir, that's
And when you were building those, the mud came down across Dry Valley every time it rained into my yard and other people's yards. And my question here is, do we need to repeat the same process where those folks in Bradley Court are gonna be walking in mud after a big rain, unless you're planning to build a water retention area first to control some of this.
Well, we'll have erosion controls in place. Just to address your assertion that there's no detention over there, we submitted a plan and there is. It's right against the building. It's underground. It was engineered and approved as such, so it does have detention there by.
On Cooper,
Yes, sir.
and that's one of the,
There's a site plan approved.
one of the biggest issues facing this town today is how to get the water drainage corrected on Cooper and Dry Valley. Every time it rains, the water just comes in a torrent down Cooper and up from Sword or whatever the other street, all around those buildings you built there, and it comes through the yards of about 5 people. You could get out in their backyards and float in a boat. And it's an issue, and I can see if that issue is not addressed on the front end a little differently than what it was out there, that you're going to flood those people down in Bradley Court.
You know, we'll have an engineered plan and a site plan that meets your detention statutes to assure that doesn't happen. I mean, your statutes are in place to prevent that. And we will
Well, I'm going to make a comment that I made at the work session. If you drive down 10th Street into Cookville and look at some of the construction that's going on, there's a set of apartments or condos on the right-hand side where they've already created a retention pond and landscaped it, and they have everything in order to catch rain. I'm concerned about water, and I know what the rules are, but I did not see that enforced out at Cooper and Dry Valley. So my concern as a councilman is I don't want people flooded. I don't want people walking in the mud. And I guess I need to see something that you're going to do, something positive is put down to convince me otherwise.
Well, your ordinances speak to that, and we'll follow those.
Well, it didn't speak to it in Cooper.
Sir, we had a detention plan that met your ordinance, and we installed it.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't agree.
We have an engineer that stamped it that said that we did.
Well, I still don't agree if a plan was put in effect. Maybe I'm the only one that's got a question, but I'm the one that's got the water coming through my backyard.
Well, you asked another question about how the grade translation
Yeah.
from high to low, and if you think just about the theoretical gradient between the two, you know, A and B, will be somewhere in that prorated string line, and that's how you transition from high to low. We'll kind of be in that middle zone.
Are you going to bring us something back to look at?
Yes, sir. The site plan process will ensure that I have to. It will go. Right now, we're just here for a rezoning, so that the construction's enabled, so that we can complete the development. And then we'll go through the site plan process, and we'll take that to the planning commission. They'll approve it. It'll either, on its own merit, it will either meet your detention statutes and other requirements of our ordinance, or you'll never see it.
Well, I just respectfully ask that you bring us back some detail, because
We have to.
I saw some detail on the Cooper project. The buildings don't look like they were shown to me in a picture.
We build exactly what we submitted, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna interject here and say that again with Mr. Gilbert, just that this is here for a zoning reclassification. We can either accept it, we can reject it, we can table it. It doesn't mean that we have to do anything on it just because it was has been sent to us from the Planning Commission. I think I'm right about that.
You are, but Mr. Gilbert's also correct that really the time to look at the site plan and determine whether or not it meets the stormwater requirements is after it's been rezoned and before the site plan is approved at the Planning Commission. So this really isn't the stage for that kind of material to be submitted. Right now, the council can, of course, the council can reject the rezoning and leave it as a general commercial property, in which case someone could develop it as a commercial property without really submitting a site plan at all. Or you can rezone it to the residential R3 high-density residential, and then that entails all the rules that require the submission of the site plan that I think addresses the concerns that Mr. Graves is raising. that's the next step in the process, not today.
Right. This is just for whether we're going to rezone the property or not. But thank you, Mr. Gilbert, for telling us what you have in mind, and I think we had understood that, again, on down the line, you envision if this is rezoned, a 24
We would just want
unit.
a third building just like that. yes,
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean, it's, while I've got you, so why didn't you do it originally? You just couldn't, couldn't purchase the property, it wasn't for sale? Is that what was?
Yeah, she lived there and it never came available.
So who owns the properties that are, cause it driven by, on the low side there, who is that, and are they aware of this request for
We
rezoning?
manage that for Tennessee.
You own that as well? Okay.
Okay, let's clarify. You own it or you manage it?
We manage it. We
Oh.
third-party manage for
Oh.
Genesis House. They
For who?
Genesis House.
Genesis House. So are they aware of your plans? Do they have an opinion?
No, they didn't call, no one's called anyone.
Okay,
Tommy.
I refresh my memory. Do adjacent neighbors get notice sent to them, or is it just the sign?
Tommy Lee,
Generally, we just put the sign up, but I don't know if all good, you don't mail out notices to you guys. I don't think they
No.
mail out notices.
the
Tommy
minutes,
does?
the minutes of the planning commission will reflect.
Tommy mailed them out.
Tommy went on record and he mailed them out and there were no objections.
He mailed them
Yes, sir.
to adjacent
Yes.
landowners?
All
It-
adjacent land.
Notice is not required to be mailed to adjacent people, but if they're doing it, that's above and beyond.
But he did.
Good.
Mr. Morrison is joining us by, is it FaceTime? And I thought I heard him speak or say something, but he might not want to.
I heard him say Tommy sent them out, mailed them out.
Okay. Can you, okay. Just so long as we just get that in the record, that's all I wanted to preserve that for.
And again, just to build off what Mr. Rader said, it gives you, it gives you the control. I mean, you get to, we have to play by the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Is there any other, do you have any other questions of him? Okay. So the question before the council is if we want to rezone this approximately 1.30 acres at 299 East Main from CA General Commercial to R3 High Density Residential.
Got one more question, sorry, probably another question for Danny. Is this setting, when you talk about rezoning, I'm thinking about this as changing it through an exception, right? And you say, what's the basis for the exception? Is the exception, because a developer asked, or is it because of, what's good for our community? And that's the kind of the way I'm looking at this, and if there's, has there, I'd look at Keith here, if Keith was here, has there been an analysis as to, what does, because it's gonna increase infrastructure. You're building, what, 24 units, is that right? I think it's 24 units. How is this going to impact our infrastructure? Is this good for the community? Have we given the public enough time to go and voice an opinion to this? And, that's kind of where I am, is what is this doing to our infrastructure? And has there been that analysis done? Or are we just changing it because we're being asked? And if it's that, then are we setting this up for a precedential type of issue where every time we're asked, we're just going to be repeated, we're going to be pointed back at this conversation, and we're going to say, well, you did it before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So the concept of zoning generally is that a city wants to be able to control growth and to have smart growth where you have high density uses and high density areas. You have low density uses and low density areas. So you have larger lot single family homes in single family residential areas. You have heavy industry and heavy industrial areas. General commercial areas where you have commercial activity, where you want those kinds of things to be in your community. And so it's more about controlling that through a location process. Now, things change, and the city has adopted, I'm sure, a long-range plan through the Planning Commission, generally a 2030 plan or even now a 2040 plan. I don't know what year you're on, but there is a long-range plan that's been adopted through the Planning Commission, I'm sure, and that talks about the areas that you're looking for these kinds of growth. And of course, one of the main areas of growth in this, not just all good, but in the Upper Cumberland generally, is high-density residential use. And so that's the thing that's going to come to you more and more and more. You're not changing it necessarily just because the developer asked, although the developer asking is usually the thing that starts the ball rolling. You would change zoning because you're making a determination as the council that that's what's good for this community in this area. This is the type of use we want to see in this area. And of course, what you're looking at is what are the neighboring properties being used for? How is the growth of the city being changed over time and in the area? So I guess this particular developer has some high-density residential right next door. Right now, it's a house and...
The house in question, that's what I was gonna say. Right now, what you have is kind of an existing spot zone. It's the only commercial parcel. You have multifamily on both sides. And so, in just general planning best practices, what I'm offering actually cleans that up. And further, like Mr. Rader said, that section has already shown itself to evolve into a higher density multifamily part of the world. And what this old house is between two other multifamily developments. And so I offer to you that you asked me, hey, what, is it just because I have offered it? It's not that. It's maybe because it's kind of a sensible evolution of planning in that regard, and giving you the control to make sure that it stays in that area and doesn't bleed over into single family and that kind of thing.
And so to kind of back it up even further, and how Allgood does this is that you've contracted with the Upper Cumberland Development District, who has a planner on staff, that's Tommy Lee, and he's your staff planner rather than you employing somebody and paying a salary for that. He's supposed to be looking at your zoning map and trying to identify consistent uses so you don't have spot zoning, so you don't have these other kinds of things, and looking at growth for your community for the future for the next 20 years. Usually you look 20, maybe 30 years out, but usually 20 years out. And you try to develop what's the community going to look like in 20 years so that you have some kind of consistency if you can do it. And then as things develop over time and properties become available, then you look to rezone to match that plan. And so then the first line of defense for the city is the Planning Commission. And they're supposed to be more experts in this arena than the council, because the council can't do everything, although you guys certainly do a lot. The Planning Commission is supposed to more specialize in that kind of decision and to give you that recommendation. And that's why every rezoning has to first go through the Planning Commission, then come to the council. You can't just start a rezoning at the council, because you're supposed to get that recommendation under the statutory scheme from the Planning Commission, who in turn gets its advice from the planner. And so they've presented it to you as a recommendation. You don't, as the mayor says, you don't have to take it. You can turn it down. You can say, no, we don't think this area of the town is right for this type of development, or not right for this type of development at this time. But keep in mind that the current zoning classification is general commercial. Somebody could come in there and put in an auto zone or put in some other thing like that that you may not think is the best. And they don't have to ask your permission. They just put the thing up. And so you've got to look as the council as an opportunity to rezone it, to control it, if that's what you think is the best use for this property. And then with respect to the concerns about how it's going to be built, how it's going to look, how do you comply with the stormwater rules, how do you comply with the other rules, that's when you do the site plan, which then also has to come back before the Planning Commission before construction starts under your zoning code as it presently exists. If the rules are not strict enough, and you've had other problems in the community, then really the right thing to do is not to determine whether or not this rezoning should happen. It's to strengthen those rules. We need to look at the stormwater rules and be sure that these kinds of things don't happen again, if that's the concern. If it's the concern as to what should be going out there, then that's a zoning question.
Because he's not wrong. I mean, there is a
Yeah.
water issue out there, and I don't know where it comes from. I'm not, there's a water issue even today when it rains.
Well, that could be one of several things. Either the developer did not comply with the rules and the engineer plans are wrong, or they did comply with the rules and the rules aren't strong enough and we need to strengthen the rules, or God's putting more water on you guys than you'd expected, so.
We need to build an ark.
That's right. So, you know, we have to look at those different things on their own merits.
And I might add this, I wasn't the building inspector on these other projects. I've got one shut down, it's been shut down for several weeks because of a water issue. And your attorney's exactly right. I think there's some areas in Allgood that we need to strengthen on the floodplain, especially areas where we channel a lot of water. We may need to go to 100-year on some stuff, maybe a 500-year on some stuff. If we've got an area that's really taking the water, then we'll have to get more restrictive in how they deal with their water. When Mr. Gilbert submits a set of drawings, I will make him build that pond to the letter. That doesn't mean it'll work. That is based on the criteria of, say, we use a 100-year floodplain. If it comes a 200-year event, that thing's out the window. We can't control the weather. It's sort of it's a growing pain. Sometimes we have to put up with. And water is, and I'll give Mr. Graves, he's right, water is a big, big issue in Allgood. Not just over there, there's some other places in Allgood. We only have 2 or 3 places, about what, Victor, about 3 places takes all the water out of this town? Sinkholes. And that's not a real good scenario. Things happen to sinkholes, but we got what we got.
All that water in that area goes into a sinkhole.
Yeah, it sure does. Butcher's bluff, I guess.
No, it's in behind the shop. behind
Do
the
you
school.
have anything else, Mr. Hill? Luke,
Yeah,
do you have anything else?
So, yeah, I do. One more thing. So, we're saying it's adjacent to your current property, and that makes sense, and it might, but where does it end, you know? You know, if a property comes, like, over by Macaulay, down by Cooper, you know, is it just the next logical step that, oh, well, there's this next parcel that's next to, you know, again, the Macaulays of the world, that we're just gonna be revisiting it here? And I guess that's, I don't know if you've got an answer for that.
I'll try and answer it.
Please.
Macaulay, I didn't ask for a rezone, it was already permitted by right, we just submitted a site plan. So we just built what was we were already entitled to. Over here, we're asking to consider the zoning that's already a higher grade of zoning being commercial, and that a more intense use could be put there and saying, hey, you know what, we're offering, hey, a lower intensity use, giving the control to you. It's kind of a, hey, this helps us too. It kind of cleans up an old house that is next to a rock quarry and a railroad and more apartments across from a, you know, I don't know what you consider the use of a school. I don't know if that's public, commercial, or what that is, but just in context, there's not a domino effect attached to this one. So where does it end? I don't know. I think one of the latitudes that you're afforded is you get to examine each case in and of itself. I'm not asking for a precedent. I'm not asking for a series of dominoes to be pushed over by this one. It's just this instance.
And you've identified the exact reason that the council gets to vote on this, because you get to decide where the dominoes stop. Because you've got to look at the bigger picture, the bigger zoning map, and determine this area is right for high density, this area is right for low density, and there's gonna be a border. And at some point, you know, yes, somebody may, okay, give me the next one, the next one, the next one, and you say, stop. We're not gonna go any farther, we're gonna keep this area low density. And that's exactly your role as the council, to decide that. And
Has that analysis been done? I mean, density? I mean, because that's what we're talking about. We're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're right, at a certain point in time, it's gonna be called upon us as the council, it might not be this council, it might be the next council, to say, enough. And has that analysis even been done?
it's supposed to be, and that's what Tommy Lee does with respect to the long-range plan. And so I think you guys should maybe have a work session and meet with Tommy and get that long-range plan and look and see what the density is. Because statewide, nationwide, density's gonna increase. It's not an all-good problem, it's not a Putnam County problem, but you also wanna keep pockets of low density because you wanna keep that quality of life for your citizens who have homes with yards and swing sets and things like that. But you also have to recognize that your population is growing, and you have to have areas for both. And that's what that long-range plan is supposed to identify. And it's ultimately your decision. It's a recommendation to you, and the long-range plan should be submitted to you, and you should review it, and you should make a determination. as to what the areas are ripe for. Now, I can tell you from doing this for a number of years now that nobody's ever happy when the rezoning happens in their neighborhood and the density grows in their neighborhood. And I've been an opponent of these kinds of things in the past, as I think Mr. Gilbert knows. So, but that's your role. That's the principal role of the council, is to determine where the dominoes stop falling and where things need to be protected and where things need to be
It's not just
developed.
ours, but, I mean, everybody's. I mean, I do hear it a lot. Too many apartments. I'm sure you've heard it. And then
Fortunately, in this
there's-
instance, the folks that we reached out to didn't feel that way, and I'm actually, just a.
I'm saying
strong-
generally.
Yeah.
Generally.
That's a whole other discussion.
I understand.
I mean, that's each man's perspective, but, a perfect example is, great coffee shops like Red Rose, they don't happen without people driving by and drinking their coffee. And I can tell you, they're excited about it. I mean, that's just more customer base for them, and what an asset they are. And, that's just the chicken and the egg.
Understood.
One feeds the other.
Understood.
I gotta make another comment. I don't hear too well to start with. Most people know that, so I keep doing this and turning hearing aids up. But I think I heard two things. I heard some discussion on a long-range plan, which I have no idea if it exists or what it says. Maybe everybody on the council does. I have no idea. We need to know something about the long-range plan.
I agree with that 100%.
Secondly, I hear something about maybe our ordinances or our rules are a little bit lax or something like that, and if that's the case, don't we need to take an effort to get things tightened up before we start rezoning things? Because once you rezone them, and if he gets zones it to what we're suggesting here, and he gets the go-ahead, we don't have any control over anything. It's in his hands. And if the enforcement people don't think it's tight enough for them to put water retention ponds or something in there, I wonder why, because Cookville does them all over the place. And they do a wonderful job with them. But that's my opinion anyhow.
Just
I think
for,
we're a little early.
yeah, for my recollection, and perhaps it was before you and maybe Mr. Bilbrey came on the board. I can't remember about Mr. Hill, but we have had work sessions with our planner who has shown us, and we have discussed lot sizes and where things ought to go or where we picture them going. There is a long-range plan, but it just may be that we need to revisit that, and let's invite our planner to come in and go over all of that with us again and refresh us on what the goal is. And that way you could feel better about, when these types of issues come up, zoning or high residential or commercial or whatever. So I will certainly be happy to reach out to Mr. Lee, and we will try to arrange something so that we can all have a session and bring us up to speed on exactly where we are. I think would that be agreeable with you all? And we're sorry, Mr. Gilbert, that you've had to endure all of this when you're just asking for a rezoning at this point. But at least it's been a good, if it is rezoned, at least you know now what some of the questions are going to be. So, hey.
Bring a site plan back, and that's a pretty good ringer we go through at the planning commission level too, so.
Yeah. We thank you.
And I would add too, that it's not just the rezoning, the long-term plan. I'd love to see what what Chief thinks is gonna be the long-term, once we start adding 24 units, 50 units, or a million units, whatever, what is that gonna do to police? What is, yes, it's gonna be increased, business and increased sales tax, but, what is it gonna do to our overall infrastructure? Can our schools handle, additional children? Can, those types of issues as well. It's not just, what makes sense to go where. So kind of big picture infrastructure. I don't know. Stop.
You've got to look at your roads, you've got to look at your water and utilities. I mean, you've got to look at everything when you do that, and that's very important because it's going to cost a lot of money to condemn land to widen roads. So
That's right. Maybe we should.
you've got the money, go for it.
Your mayor would respectfully request that we just stick with what's on tonight's agenda, please. And let's just get back to what we've got in front of us before we bite off too much of the apple here. All right. We're back to item number 12, whether to rezone approximately 1.3 acres at 299 East Main from CA General Commercial to R3 High Density Residential. And it did come to us with the Planning Commission's approval.
Can I make a motion to table it?
You may.
Because that would be my motion, to table it, because I need that information. I can't make a decision unless I know what that long-term planning is, how it impacts our infrastructure, schools, water. And I'd also love to hear, it just came to me, I can't imagine I'm unique in that, other folks in the public have had notice to, I mean, I know there's a public hearing somewhere down the road, but maybe at that work session, we could hear from some of the public as to what their thoughts are on, increased density in our community.
All right, Mr. Hill has made a motion to table proposed ordinance 660-21 regarding the zoning classification. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Graves. All right. Ms. Flatt?
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins,
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
All right. Number 13, consider approval of CRI for a fiscal year 21 audit ending June 30th of 2021. This is the group that has done our audit for the last 6 or 7 years. And they are already, we need to get approval for someone to take this over, and if we're going to employ them again to do it for this year. I think we've discussed this pretty much. If there are any questions or comments you want to make about the CRI who's been doing our auditing,
I think they've done a good
everything?
job.
I
Yeah.
think they've done a good job.
All right. Well, then I would consider a motion to approve them for fiscal year 21.
I make a motion.
Ms. Hawkins, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Luke got it.
Okay.
Dibs.
Mr. Hill.
Thank you.
Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes.
Honorable Hawkins,
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Items 14 and 15. We may need some direction here, Mr. Rader. Oh, okay.
When you're ready.
All right. Well, we have right at this moment, we have a beer board. Now, I think it was a 5-person board. We have had 3 people resign. So what happens is that we put on our agenda 2 slots to potentially fill those vacancies on the beer board. But now there would be actually 3 slots to fill. So there was some discussion at the work session about doing away, without having a separate beer board, that perhaps the council would want to serve on the beer board. And no one can remember the beer board's last meeting, actually, and it's not been in recent history anyway. We haven't had any questions come up. So, I understand that Mr. Graves has some more information for us.
Yeah, at the work session, we talked about this in some detail. And I asked our attorney before the meeting tonight if, how we could move forward on that. And what I would like to do is make a motion that's been crafted by Danny. And the motion is to adopt an ordinance on first reading to amend Section 8-201 of the All-Good Municipal Code by deleting the section and substituting the following language. 8-201, beer board established. There is hereby established a beer board to be composed of the 5 members who shall be the same persons serving as mayor and members of the city council, who shall serve during their terms on the city council. Members shall serve without additional compensation. So basically my motion is for the city council to become the beer board. And that has to be done by ordinance as an attorney says.
Mr. Rader, is it possible to do both things in one motion, that we delete one portion and then we substitute?
Yes, ma'am. That's so the section that you're replacing is the section that says the billboard's got 5 members and they have these terms, and we're just delete that section and then just replace it with this section, reconstituting the beer board with the city council persons and the mayor. And you can do all that in one ordinance. And so tonight would then be the first reading, and then we would have to have that published and have a second reading with the normal public hearing at the next meeting.
Okay. All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Hawkins. All right. Ms. Flatt.
Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bilbrey,
Yes.
Honorable Graves,
Yes?
Honorable Hawkins,
Yes.
Honorable Hill.
Yes.
Okay. If we can just have that come back then at the appropriate time for a second reading and a public hearing. All right. Our city administrator's report. I don't know. Does he feel like it? I mean, Mr. Morrison, for those of you who don't know, is out today, and is he shaking his head? Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Okay, so the Easter event scheduled for April the 3rd from 11 to 2 at the White Plains House. The fire department's going to hand out candy and Easter eggs, and the Easter bunny's going to safely sit on the porch and wave at kids as they go by. We had also mentioned last night at the work session that there was a potential that we could purchase a mini excavator or compact excavator this year and pull that off of next year's budget list. We have confirmed with John Deere, which would be matching equipment and some of the things that we already have in stock, that they have a 35G compact with an enclosed cab on the lot with a trailer that they could give us under the Sourcewell pre-bid price for $53,600. And Mr. Jones can elaborate on that, and then the Chief Armor if he has anything from the police department.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Department heads, Director Jones.
I think what we're asking is, if we get the okay to do what we talked about at the work session.
Okay. Of course, that'll come under budget issues, and we'll take that up at another time. But thank you for making us aware of that. We can purchase it, and then we won't have that expense on our next budget, right? Okay. Chief?
Good. Everything's good.
Well, that's what we like to say now. All together now. It's all good and all good. So, All right, is there any other business, or do we have any citizens who would like to address the council? Someone have a question? All right, hearing none, then I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn unless anybody objects. So done. So moved.